Most people spend their entire lives running from one problem to the next, convinced that if they just hurry fast enough, they'll finally feel safe, respected, or successful. But what if all that frantic effort is the very thing keeping you stuck? The Buddha taught that the mind is like a candle in the wind, unsteady, flickering, ready to be blown out by even the smallest gust of emotion. And until you learn to protect that flame with calm, you'll keep losing yourself in every storm that comes your way. Today, we're going to talk about something that could completely change the way you live, work, and lead. The power of staying steady when the world demands you panic. Because success isn't built on speed alone. It's built on clarity, presence, and the quiet strength to choose your response when everyone else is reacting without thinking. By the end of this video, you'll have simple, practical ways to train your mind to stay calm so you can make decisions you're proud of and become the kind of person others trust and admire. If you appreciate having a space like this, where ancient wisdom meets the real challenges of modern life, there's a small free favor I'd love you to consider. Just tap the subscribe button so you don't miss these conversations. And please, don't skip any part of this video. Every moment we're about to share could hold exactly the insight you've been searching for. There's something almost invisible that happens when your mind is racing. It steals your ability to see clearly. You've probably noticed this in your own life. One moment, you're handling your day just fine, and the next, your thoughts start spinning so quickly that you can't tell what's real, what's important, or what you actually feel. The Buddha often spoke about this restless energy in the mind, calling it monkey mind, because it jumps from branch to branch, never stopping long enough to see the ground beneath it. And when you let that frantic movement run the show, you end up reacting from confusion instead of responding from understanding. Think about how many times you've replayed an argument in your head over and over. Maybe you imagined what you should have said or worried about what the other person was thinking. Or maybe you've laid awake at night, your mind rehearsing every possible outcome of a situation that hasn't even happened yet. This is what happens when we don't learn to slow our thoughts. They start to grow larger than life, like shadows on a wall, convincing us that we have to do something right now or everything will fall apart. But here's what the Buddha taught. Most suffering isn't caused by what's actually happening. It's caused by the stories we tell ourselves about it. And those stories grow louder the faster our thoughts move. When you start to slow down, something remarkable begins to happen. You create just enough space between your thoughts to question them. You notice that not every worry deserves your belief. You see that many of your fears are simply old patterns playing out again, not truths about who you are or what your future will be. This space is where clarity lives. It's like standing on the shore and watching waves roll in and out instead of being tossed around by them. You start to understand that you don't have to react to every emotion the moment it appears. You don't have to believe every anxious thought just because it feels urgent. One of the most practical ways to do this is to use your breath as an anchor. The Buddha taught that mindfulness of breathing is a doorway to stillness. When you feel your mind speeding up, when you notice yourself jumping from worry to worry, pause. Bring your attention to the sensation of air moving in and out of your body. Feel your chest rise and fall. Count your breaths if you need to. Even 3 slow breaths can create enough distance from the rush in your head to see things more clearly. Some people hear this advice and think, that sounds too simple to work. But simplicity is exactly why it's powerful. Your mind has been trained for years to believe that speed equals control. But the truth is, the faster your thoughts move, the less control you actually have. When you slow them down, you regain your ability to choose not just your actions but your attitude. You can decide whether this is a moment that requires action or simply understanding. You can decide if a thought is worth exploring or if it's better left alone. Sometimes it feels like calm is just something that happens to you when life is finally gentle, when the bills are paid, when everyone is treating you kindly, when the path is smooth. But the Buddha reminded us that waiting for perfect circumstances is the surest way to suffer. He said that conditions will always change, that gain and loss, praise and blame, comfort and discomfort are like the winds that never stop blowing across our lives. If you're always waiting for the wind to stop, you'll spend your days exhausted, chasing a stillness that never arrives on its own. The real practice, the one that transforms your mind and your future, is learning to create your own calm in the middle of the storm. This isn't some lofty spiritual ideal that only monks can achieve. It's a skill, one you build slowly, with practice and patience. Calm is a decision you make, and you often have to make it over and over again in the same hour. It's that moment when someone speaks to you with disrespect, and everything in you wants to snap back, but you pause instead. You feel the heat in your chest, the tightness in your throat, and you breathe. You remind yourself that you don't need to mirror someone else's chaos to prove your worth. You remember that your peace is more valuable than your pride. And in that simple choice to step back and notice before you react, you reclaim a little more freedom from the patterns that have kept you stuck. Think about how many times your first reaction only made things worse. The Buddha taught that our suffering often doesn't come from what happens, but from how we respond to what happens. The event is just the event, neutral, temporary, part of the natural flow of cause and effect. But when we react out of fear, anger, or insecurity, we create additional layers of struggle. We say things we regret. We shut down possibilities. We hurt others and ourselves. It takes so much courage to choose calm when your emotions feel loud and urgent. But that's the very moment when your practice becomes real. That's when you get to decide whether you'll keep replaying old habits or step into a wiser way of living. Some people believe that staying calm means you don't care, or that you're avoiding the truth. But the Buddha didn't teach us to be numb. He taught us to feel everything fully without letting it control us. Imagine sitting by a river, watching the water flow past. You can see the leaves and branches drift by. Some days the river is wild, crashing against the rocks. Other days it moves like a quiet mirror. But no matter what the surface looks like, you are sitting on the bank, aware and steady. That's what calm is. It doesn't deny the movement, but it doesn't get swept away either. When you start to see calm as a decision rather than a lucky feeling, you stop waiting for life to hand it to you. You start practicing it in small ways. Maybe it looks like pausing before you send that text message. Maybe it's taking 3 breaths before you answer a difficult question. Maybe it's choosing to listen fully instead of planning your defense. Over time, those little decisions add up. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to notice that you don't have to fear every emotion because you know you have the capacity to hold it without losing your center. It's almost automatic, isn't it? The moment something triggers you, an unfair comment, a sudden disappointment, an unexpected challenge, your entire body seems to tighten, and your mind rushes to defend, to argue, to prove a point. The Buddha often spoke about this very human reaction. He described how our minds, left untended, react like a fire touched by the wind, flaring up, spreading fast, burning everything around us before we even realize what's happening. And the saddest part is that most of us don't see the damage until later. We look back and think, I wish I had handled that differently, but in the moment, it feels so urgent to respond, to protect ourselves from whatever threat we think is coming. This is where the practice of pausing becomes such a powerful skill. Not a passive waiting, not a way to avoid conflict, but a deliberate act of wisdom. When you learn to pause, even for a few seconds, you give yourself the chance to step out of the storm of your thoughts and see the situation clearly. You create space between the feeling and the action, and in that space, you reclaim your freedom. You don't have to be dragged around by every wave of emotion. You don't have to let the heat of the moment define who you are. The Buddha taught that mindfulness is like holding up a lantern in the dark. When you bring awareness to what you're experiencing, you see things you would have missed in your rush to react. You notice the fear under your anger, the old stories fueling your defensiveness, the assumptions you're making about someone else's intentions. Think about the last time you snapped at someone you care about. Maybe you were tired or worried about something else entirely. But in that split second, your mind decided that lashing out was the answer. It's only afterward that regret shows up, once the words have already landed, once the tension has already settled in. This is why pausing is such a gift, not just to you, but to everyone around you. Because when you pause, you interrupt the pattern. You refuse to keep rehearsing the same reactions that have never brought you peace. You choose something different, something more conscious. A simple way to start practicing this is to pay attention to the sensations in your body when you feel triggered. Your heart might beat faster. Your jaw might tighten. Your breath might get shallow. When you notice these signs, that's your cue to stop. You don't need to analyze or judge yourself. Just take one slow, deliberate breath. Feel the air moving in and out of your chest. Even a single breath can be enough to soften the edges of urgency. The Buddha taught that awareness of the body anchors the mind. Instead of getting lost in thoughts, you return to the direct experience of the moment, which is almost always more manageable than the stories your mind is spinning. There's something quietly powerful about those moments when you decide you're not going to be rushed, no matter how much pressure you feel. It almost feels rebellious in a world that celebrates urgency and constant movement. The Buddha often spoke about how our suffering doesn't always come from what's happening outside of us, but from how we respond to it. He taught that when the mind is agitated, it's like muddy water. You can't see clearly through it, no matter how hard you try. You swirl your thoughts around hoping to find an answer, but all you really do is kick up more silt. This is why learning to slow down isn't just a luxury. It's an essential practice if you want to see your life with any kind of accuracy. Because without stillness, you can't have clarity. And without clarity, even your best intentions turn into more confusion. Think about the last time you were overwhelmed by a problem. Maybe it was a disagreement with someone you love, a crisis at work, or a moment when you felt like your entire future was riding on a single decision. What did your mind do? Probably it started racing, replaying worst-case scenarios, trying to control things you couldn't control, and searching frantically for a solution so you could feel safe again. But in all that mental noise, how many times did you find real peace or a genuine answer? The Buddha taught that wisdom arises naturally when the mind is quiet. You don't have to force it or chase it. It's already there, like the clear water underneath the mud. You just have to let it settle. Stillness isn't about giving up or pretending you don't care. It's about respecting yourself enough to pause before you act. It's saying, I deserve to see this clearly before I respond. That doesn't always come easily, especially when you're used to believing that quick reactions make you strong. But if you look closely, you'll see that some of the most regrettable choices you've made happened when you reacted from confusion instead of clarity. You might have sent that angry message, quit something too soon, or made a promise you couldn't keep because you felt pressured to do something, anything, to make the discomfort stop. The Buddha's example reminds us that stillness is not the same as inaction. He spent years in deep reflection, not because he was avoiding life, but because he knew that only a quiet mind could see what really matters. When you allow yourself to pause, you create a little space between what's happening and how you choose to respond. And in that space, you find the wisdom that panic always drowns out. Let's be honest, modern life makes this even harder. We're surrounded by voices telling us we're falling behind if we don't answer every message right away or fix every problem immediately. But ask yourself, has rushing ever given you more control? Or has it mostly left you feeling exhausted and unsure? There's a story in Buddhist tradition about a monk who was tasked with carrying a full cup of water across a rocky path. If he walked too quickly, the water would spill. If he tried to keep looking ahead instead of watching each step, he'd trip. The only way to complete the journey was to move slowly, to be fully present with each movement. That story isn't just about carrying water, it's about carrying your own life with care. There's something most people don't realize about building a calm mind. It doesn't happen only when you're faced with big, life-changing moments. It actually starts in the tiniest situations, the ones you think don't matter. The Buddha often reminded his followers that transformation happens in the simple, ordinary moments that make up our days. He taught that every small reaction is a seed, and if you keep planting seeds of tension, impatience, or frustration, those are the plants that will eventually grow strong in your life. But if you can start practicing calm in those little moments, you're training your mind to stay steady when it really counts. Think about it this way. If you wait until your life is on fire to start learning how to be calm, you're going to be overwhelmed. But if you start practicing when the stakes are low, you're quietly building an inner strength that will carry you when things get hard. One of the best places to start is right in the middle of your normal daily frustrations. Maybe you're stuck in traffic, and you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, the impulse to honk or mutter under your breath. Or you're waiting in a long line, convinced that this delay is stealing your precious time. Or perhaps someone interrupts you for the third time in a row, and you feel your patience dissolving. These moments are your training ground. You don't have to treat them as inconveniences. You can treat them as opportunities to notice your mind, to breathe, to choose a new response. The Buddha said that awareness is like a lamp that can light up even the darkest corners of our habits. When you shine that lamp on your reactions, you see clearly that you have more choices than you think. You realize you don't have to be a prisoner of your impulses. Sometimes people think, but this is so minor. Why should I care about staying calm over something small? The truth is, your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a small irritation and a big crisis if you keep reacting with the same urgency every time. If you train yourself to get worked up over little things, you're rehearsing that same panic response over and over. And soon, it becomes automatic. But imagine how different your days could feel if you practice pausing, even in the smallest discomfort. When the person in front of you at the grocery store is taking forever, you could sigh and stew in resentment. Or you could soften your shoulders, take a slow breath, and remind yourself that this is not worth disturbing your peace. In that moment, you reclaim your power. You're no longer at the mercy of every passing inconvenience. The Buddha often compared the mind to a wild horse. If you try to tame it only when it's already galloping out of control, you'll struggle. But if you start training it when it's still, when the energy is low, you build trust and discipline gradually. Each time you catch yourself about to react and instead take a breath, you're strengthening your ability to stay centered. You're telling your mind, I don't have to run with every feeling that shows up. Over time, this practice adds up in ways you can't even imagine. You start noticing that you feel less exhausted by the end of the day, less reactive to other people's moods, less tangled up in your own stories. You start to feel a quiet steadiness that doesn't depend on your circumstances being perfect. There's something most people don't realize until they're deep into the work of building a life they care about. Distractions aren't always loud, obvious temptations. They're often quiet. They come in the form of other people's doubts, casual invitations to do things that don't matter, or well-meaning friends who don't understand why you're so committed to your path. The Buddha often spoke about this, reminding his followers that the mind naturally wanders like a curious monkey, swinging from branch to branch, never satisfied for long. And unless you train it to return to what's important, you'll spend your days pulled in 100 directions, never feeling truly fulfilled. You might have noticed this yourself. You sit down to work on something meaningful, a project, a goal, a practice that could change your future, and before you know it, someone calls you to vent about their problems, or a notification pings and pulls your thoughts away. You think you'll just take a minute to check, but that minute becomes half an hour. And by the time you return to what matters, your energy is scattered, your mind is restless, and your confidence is a little weaker. The Buddha taught that guarding the sense doors, protecting what you allow into your awareness, is essential for cultivating peace and wisdom. Because every time you let distraction have your attention, you are giving away the very power you need to build the life you say you want. It doesn't mean you have to shut yourself off from everyone or live in some remote cave, although sometimes that sounds appealing. What it really means is you become deeply honest about which voices, activities, and environments nourish your purpose and which ones drain it. It means you recognize that not everyone will understand your priorities, and that's okay. You're not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to honor the vision in your heart. You're here to stay true to what you value, even when other people don't see the point. The Buddha called this right effort, the commitment to put your energy into wholesome, meaningful actions, rather than scattering it on things that pull you off your path. You'll notice that when you start taking your focus seriously, some people will feel unsettled by it. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. You have. You've stopped agreeing to every distraction disguised as a harmless invitation. You've stopped pretending you have time to waste. And that can make others uncomfortable, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your commitment highlights what they're avoiding in themselves. If you're not prepared for that, you might find yourself apologizing for your discipline or softening your edges so others don't feel threatened. But the Buddha taught that we can't walk another person's path for them. We can only be clear about our own and trust that those who respect us will come to understand. You know, one of the things that surprises people the most when they start exploring Buddhist wisdom is just how ordinary the path to peace really looks. We expect something dramatic, some instant awakening that changes everything overnight. But the Buddha taught again and again that peace is never a single moment you stumble into. It's a steady practice, something you build with simple habits, repeated every day. He often compared the mind to a garden. If you don't tend it, weeds of confusion, craving, and anger grow without any effort at all. But if you water it carefully, if you pull up the weeds when they appear and plant seeds of discipline and awareness, that garden becomes a refuge, a place you can return to no matter how loud the world gets. Think about the moments when you feel most overwhelmed. Maybe it's when your schedule feels too full, or when someone you care about says something that stings, or when your plans fall apart without warning. In those moments, your nervous system is already on high alert, and if you don't have a structure that supports you, it's almost impossible to stay calm. You might find yourself snapping at people you love, doubting your worth, or giving up on your priorities altogether. That's why having strong habits isn't just about productivity. It's about protecting your inner peace. When you set up daily practices that remind you who you are and what you stand for, you create a sense of safety inside yourself that doesn't depend on everything going perfectly. Buddhist teachings are clear about this. Discipline isn't about punishing yourself or forcing life into a rigid mold. It's about giving yourself a steady rhythm to lean on, especially when things feel unpredictable. When you wake up each morning and start your day intentionally, whether it's with a few minutes of meditation, a walk in the fresh air, or simply sitting quietly with your breath, you're sending a message to your mind. You're saying, we begin from calm, not chaos. That one decision can change the tone of everything that follows. Instead of starting on the back foot, reacting to every demand, you step into your day already rooted in your values. And it doesn't stop there. The Buddha also taught that mindfulness is strengthened by repetition. That means every small habit you build, like taking a pause before responding to a message, drinking water when you feel stressed, or stepping away from your phone when your thoughts get tangled, plants another seed of awareness. Over time, these little rituals create an environment where peace feels natural instead of forced. You stop needing the world to slow down because you've trained your mind to slow down from within. There's a reason anger feels so powerful when it rushes through you. In an instant, it makes your heart pound, your face flush, and your thoughts sharpen into a single burning point. Defend yourself. Make them understand. Prove you're not weak. The Buddha knew this feeling well. He taught that anger is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You end up burning your own hand long before it ever reaches them. It's a natural emotion, one that rises up when you feel attacked or disrespected. But letting it drive your next move almost always leads to regret. The real strength isn't in how loud you can shout or how quickly you can retaliate. It's in your ability to pause and give yourself space to respond with clarity instead of impulse. Most of the damage people carry in their relationships didn't come from thoughtfully chosen words. It came from split-second reactions, things said in the heat of frustration, decisions made while the mind was still trembling with emotion. And it doesn't stop there. Anger clouds your vision in every area of life. It makes small problems feel enormous. It pushes you to win an argument at any cost, even if that cost is trust or connection. It urges you to act fast because it convinces you that patience means weakness. But the Buddha taught that patience isn't a lack of feeling. It's the highest form of self-mastery. It's knowing you are not a slave to every surge of energy that passes through your body. You can feel deeply without reacting destructively. Think about the last time you were truly angry. If you're honest, you'll see that the emotion came with a story. Something like, "They shouldn't treat me this way," or "If I don't defend myself, I'll look foolish." These stories feel so real at the moment, they convince you that you have to act and you have to act now. But if you had paused, even for a breath or two, you might have noticed that the story was only one version of the truth. You might have realized that reacting from that place wouldn't actually fix anything. This is the gift of patience. It gives you the chance to see what's under the anger. Maybe it's fear of being misunderstood. Maybe it's sadness that you don't feel valued. Maybe it's disappointing that your expectations weren't met. Whatever it is, seeing it clearly lets you choose a response that heals rather than harms. In Buddhist practice, this pause between feeling and action is everything. It's where awareness lives. The Buddha called this mindfulness, simply observing your experience without judgment. When you feel anger, you don't have to push it away or pretend it isn't there. You can name it. This is anger. You can feel it moving in your chest, in your throat, in your stomach. You can watch it rise and you can watch it pass. And it always passes. No feeling, no matter how intense, is permanent. When you remember this, you realize you don't have to act on every emotion. You can sit with it until it softens and then decide what to do next from a place of steadiness. There's a certain kind of regret that feels heavier than all the others. The regret of knowing you acted too quickly, said too much, or chose something you didn't truly want, simply because your mind was clouded by emotion. The Buddha often reminded us that an untrained mind is like a wild horse. It runs in every direction, dragging you with it. And if you let that wild horse make your decisions, you'll spend years cleaning up the mess it leaves behind. Think about all the moments when you felt pressured to decide right away, when someone was waiting for an answer, when your heart was pounding, when your thoughts were loud and tangled. It can feel like you don't have time to wait for calm, but that urgency is usually just fear wearing a mask. The truth is, almost nothing good comes from making choices in panic. You might feel like taking quick action proves you're strong or decisive, but the Buddha taught that real strength comes from patience and clarity, not from speed. When your mind is stirred up, it's like a muddy pond. You can't see the bottom no matter how hard you try. And in that state, you're likely to grab onto whatever seems like relief in the moment, even if it's not what you truly need. That's why it's so important to learn the discipline of pausing, of letting the water settle before you decide. This isn't about avoiding responsibility or stalling forever. It's about respecting yourself enough to give your thoughts room to breathe. Consider how often you've agreed to something just to make the discomfort go away. Committing to plans you didn't want, saying yes to work you couldn't handle, apologizing for things that weren't your fault, or making big life decisions in the middle of emotional storms. Later, when your mind felt calmer, you probably looked back and thought, "Why did I do that?" The Buddha would tell you it's because you didn't pause. You let your momentary emotion become your permanent direction. But you don't have to keep living this way. You can train your mind to create space before you act. When you choose calm over chaos, you're not just protecting your peace, you're honoring your deepest wisdom. Every gentle pause, every mindful breath is a step toward a life you don't have to run away from. Thank you for walking this path of clarity and self-mastery with me. If you'd like to keep growing together, there's another video waiting right here that will guide you even further. And thank you for being a part of Buddhist Journey.